Righto, Toyota champs. Now let's see which is the best smartphone camera you can buy now in 2018. Shootout between the Huawei P20 Pro and the iPhone XS Max. So you want to upgrade that Windows Home to Windows Pro, or just get killer prices on Windows Office 2016 and cheap gaming keys? Head on down to 0 and 9. Make sure you copy and paste my code from the description to get a price that's going to make you go woo! The reason I am owning this Huawei P20 Pro is because of its camera, and that's it. But will the XS be better in the camera department? Now everything is shot in auto, and the Huawei has artificial intelligence where it will select HDR when it wants to and just other sort of modes when it wants to. If it doesn't select HDR, bad luck. I'll take the photo as it comes out automatic from both of them. I take one shot and that's it. Alright, so let's start with portrait mode, and we are in portrait mode now with the iPhone XS Max. And as you can see here, this photo looks brilliant, doesn't it? And it's just not, you can see I'm going for the aperture here, blurring out the background, and it's not just like a Gaussian or Gaussian blur. It is proper, like mimicking the actual real camera blur you get from a camera when you change the f-stop, the diaphragm, the blades. It mimics that. And as you can see here, I'm going through all the portraits. You can see how well that marks out there. Now this isn't the actual real mask, but you can see how well it's outlined his face and separated it from the background. Now the iPhone XS Max uses the actual 2x portrait lens, or the zoom lens, when it actually does a portrait. Now that is perfect. Look at those eyes, look how blue they are. He's red and he was very flush. We're both sick, we're both pushing 40 degrees. I'm like 140 heartbeat, 40 degrees, he's 40.2 degrees. We're on the heavy juice now. We've been very sick, and that's why he's very red. But let's go into the front facing camera now. That was the rear facing camera. Let's go to the front facing camera, and you can see this portrait here, and you can tell straight away the front facing camera, it's not separated, it's good. It hasn't outlined him as good, and it's a higher ISO. You can see he doesn't have that sparkle in his eyes. You can't see the real blue of his eyes. It is separated nicely, you can still see that, but you can see it's bleeding into his face a little bit there. It still works well. Look how well it works. It looks really good. This is the brilliant feature of this phone. It is actually, you know, a lot of phones have been doing it, but not like this. But you can see if you're getting close there, look at the eyes. I'll go back to the other photo later. They're just not as blue as the other one, and his cheeks aren't as red. And I remember this scene, and this is how red he was, and his eyes were sparkling a bit. It was low light in here. So as you can see there, look at the eyes here. They're much bluer. He's a bit redder. The background was a bit darker than it is showing in here. But it looks brilliant, and this is the real photo now, and you can see his eyes sparkle. Now I'm actually looking at the Huawei in the same portrait mode, and you can see with the Huawei the background is darker, and you can see it's a wider angle, and you'll see that of course a portrait always looks better close in. That's what a portrait shot is. You use a longer lens, you compress the face, you separate the background. You can see the Huawei doesn't use its zoom lens when it does a portrait shot, so it is wider, but it does separate the background good. It is more neutral looking in this environment, but he was more red. The background looks good, but overall I would say for the portrait part, I would say the iPhone is the winner here. If you look at them side by side, come on, look at those sparkling eyes. It looks better on the iPhone, I've got to admit that. Now this is shooting into the sun, high contrast situation. iPhone XS Max done a good job here, holding the dynamic range, and now this is with the Huawei. It didn't select HDR, so you can see the dynamic range isn't there compared to the iPhone. Now look at it in close. Actually the Huawei looks better in close, looks more contrasty, it looks like a better photo in close, but when you look at it all together, the iPhone one did look better. So bad luck for the Huawei for not selecting HDR. Now for another torture test straight into the sun, and you can see with the iPhone the dynamic range is held pretty well, but it looks very flat. The image looks flat. The Huawei done a good job. It selected HDR here, so it holds that dynamic range like it should, but when you crop in close, you can see the winner here is the P20 on the right, and you can see it's much more dynamic, it has much more contrast, more detail, and the iPhone on the left looks very flat. So now we're in a church, bad lighting of course, but it's done a very good job here, the iPhone. Look at it, nice dynamic range, it looks really good, it looks like it's got good lighting. You can see the stained glass at the front of the photo, it's held its dynamic range. When you go to the Huawei, you can see in the glass it hasn't held that dynamic range, it hasn't selected HDR here again. But have a look at the seats, it looks a lot better. The actual image looks a lot better, so it just shows you dynamic range is not everything. And even if you look in the arches here, you can see the iPhone on the right, it's showing the shadows better, but the actual photo looks better on the Huawei P20. So this is the iPhone XS Max. Now what you need to know about this is those roof beams you could not see, that was completely in shadow, so this is an amazing photo. It really is good, nice dynamic range. But if you look at the Huawei one in night mode, you can actually see the beams better, there is less shadows. But when you crop in close, if you look on the left, the iPhone is sharper than the Huawei. Now this is very unusual because usually the Huawei is sharper, even in night mode. This is an anomaly and it only happened once, but hey, they only get one shot each and that's how it is. Now this is the ultimate low light torture test. This was actually the darkest part of the church. You could not actually see the door and you would not even take a photo in these conditions. You'd have to have a chromosome missing to do that. Now, looking at this iPhone picture, it looks very good actually. I'm very surprised it actually could take a photo in this low light. Go to the Huawei, wow, it looks like it's lit up. The Huawei just amazes me in night mode. Nothing can touch this P20 Pro in night mode. And if you go in and crop in them both, you can see the Huawei on the left still has wood grain. Whereas you look at the iPhone, it has actually smoothed all that wood grain out with noise reduction. So look at this photo, it looks fantastic, right? Heavy shadow on this side of the bridge, so dynamic range is really good. Looks beautiful until, boom, look at that. Huawei P20 just absolutely blitzes here. Look at the shine on that water. Look how good it looks. Look at them side by side. The iPhone on the right, very flat. The Huawei on the left. Just look at the water. Look at the detail in the background, the sharpness. And people might say, well, the iPhone looks more natural. I don't care. That just looks 100 times better with the Huawei here. And that's the biggest difference we're probably going to see. But this is why the Huawei is the key. So this is the iPhone in a laneway, very low light, but you can see very good dynamic range and you can see the doorway is very good. Look at the Huawei one, you can see it looks very good, but the door's a bit darker, so it didn't select HDR, but then I shot it in night mode and you can see the doorway and the dynamic range is much wider on the Huawei in night mode. Crop in close and you can see here, look on the right hand side, the Huawei on night mode. Look at the pink writing on the ledge and look at the micro contrast on the brickwork there. You can't even see it on the other photos, so that is probably a little bit over sharpened, but if you go in really close with both of them, just both the standard photos on the iPhones on the left and the Huawei's on the right, the Huawei just has better detail. So I'll give the win to the Huawei here. Another shot, low light in the lane with the iPhone 10. You can see it's done a great job here with dynamic range. The photo looks awesome, but then you see the Huawei one, it just looks better, a bit more punch contrast as usual. You're cropping close again. Look at the yellow of the Huawei on the bottom. You can see it's much sharper than the iPhone image on the top. So I've got to give it to the Huawei here again. Alright, let's test the zoom lens. This is how far we were away from the MCG. You can see 2 times here with the iPhone. Very good. Nice amount of detail. Gets in nice and close. But the Huawei has 3 times. So you can see it's even closer. Has a bit more contrast there. But the Huawei has a 5 times as well. Hybrid. Look how close that is. That's pretty good. And a crop of the 2 times versus 3 times with the Huawei on the right here, you can see much more detail with the Huawei. And also you've got contrast in the trees there. So here we have the iPhone in portrait mode, taking a photo of this chair. I really like this photo. The background looks really nice. But now we look at the Huawei, it's a bit wider. It is in aperture mode, it's sort of like portrait mode, same sort of thing. It doesn't look quite as good as the iPhone. The blur just doesn't look as good and doesn't look as consistent. But going close to the iPhone, you see it's on the left, it looks a bit sharper, but the edge detection is really bad. And the Huawei's on the right, it looks a bit softer, but it did detect the edges a bit better there. So we have the iPhone here, high dynamic range required here because it's very hard shot, tricky lighting into the sun. looks really good, doesn't it? Good dynamic range, I have to say. But then you see the Huawei and then it's like, boom, kick you in the nuts there, son. Yeah, it didn't select HDR here, but it did have heaps of dynamic range. It looks sharper, looks more contrasty. Zoom in a bit here, and you can see there the Huawei just looks a bit better. It is a bit darker. The dynamic range of the iPhone is better, is wider, but the overall shot, the P20 is better. A quick happy snap of thy son in the backyard in shadow with the iPhone. Looks really good. I had no complaints with this photo. But then the Huawei, boom, another kick in the nuts there. You can see the contrast. You can see it just looks a bit punchier. It looks better. Now the iPhone does look more natural in this case, but if you zoom in close there, you can see the iPhone looks soft, and you can't even tell he's got blue eyes, where with the Huawei P20 you can see he's got blue eyes. It is sharper, probably just a bit too sharp for mine, but you can see he's got blue eyes, and yeah, he is sick just like me. So which one was the iPhone and which one was the Huawei? Let me know, first or second. Well, anyway, so overall the camera, iPhone, #1 for portrait mode now. It is exceptional at portrait mode. The camera is really good, but it cannot compete to the Huawei P20 Pro. I mean, at the end of the day, the Huawei has the biggest sensor. It's co-engineered with Leica, which is one of the best camera brands in the world. So it has premium optics, the biggest sensor. It's like a bespoke sensor as far as I know. And it's going to be hard to beat the P20 Pro. And if you have a look at the leak of the DxO mark, the P20 Pro is still the king. And the Mate Pro overtook it. But the Pixel 3, which is due out next month, still could not beat the P20 Pro. That's what it is. The iPhone, great camera, but the Huawei is better. Video, different story, and I will get to that. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next one. Tally ho.